So, this is how it begins, not with a flashy trade alert splashed across every sports headline, not with a tearful retirement announcement that closes a chapter in history, but with a fracture, a deep, spreading fracture hidden just beneath the surface of one of the most anticipated partnerships the WNBA has ever seen. Caitlin Clark, the generational phenomenon who was supposed to lead the Indiana Fever into a new golden age, isn't storming out or slamming doors, but she's slowly, methodically, and perhaps inevitably slipping away. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, relentless rumble of discontent that's been building for weeks, maybe months. And if you've been paying attention, you already know this story isn't just about basketball. It's about egos clashing behind closed doors, trust being chipped away piece by piece, and a fan base watching their dream season turn into a slow emotion unraveling. From the outside, it still looks polished, still looks like the fairy tale everyone wanted to believe in. But behind the curtain, something is breaking. And once it shatters, there may be no putting it back together. It started subtly, almost invisibly, like hairline cracks in glass you only notice when the sunlight hits them just right. Early in the season, the chemistry seemed untouchable. Caitlin Clark was dropping dimes, hitting deep threes, and electrifying the crowd, while the Indiana Fever were being painted as the team destined to reclaim glory. But inside that locker room, the smiles didn't always match the story. Whispers started to swirl. Was Clark really being embraced as the leader, or was she just a headline to sell tickets and jerseys? Teammates began having quiet side conversations, coaches adjusted rotations in ways that raised eyebrows, and suddenly Clark's minutes and shot attempts were scrutinized like never before. It wasn't open warfare, but it was a slow, grinding tension that you could feel if you looked close enough. And for someone as fiercely competitive as Caitlin, every small slight, every subtle shift in tone, every unexplained decision from the coaching staff felt like a signal, one that maybe she wasn't as valued as she thought she would be. The real turning point came when the spotlight that once seemed like a blessing started to feel like a weapon. Every missed shot, every turnover, every defensive lapse, no matter how small, was amplified under the crushing weight of national attention. Instead of rallying around her, some in the organization seemed to feed off the narrative that Caitlin wasn't adjusting fast enough to the pro game. Local media began running stories hinting at friction, rival players made thinly veiled comments in post-game interviews, and suddenly the Fever's locker room felt less like a team chasing a championship and more like a pressure cooker ready to explode. It wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about politics, ego, and control. And while Clark was trying to focus on basketball, she could feel the subtle jabs, the shifting body language, the carefully worded quotes that made it clear certain people in power weren't fully in her corner. It was a slow erosion of trust, and the cracks in that once bright partnership were starting to split wide open. And then came the games that changed everything. The moments when it became impossible to ignore that something deeper was wrong. Caitlin would light up the scoreboard one night, only to mysteriously find herself sidelined in critical stretches the next. Plays were drawn up without her as the first option. Lineups were shuffled in ways that made no strategic sense, and yet when questioned, the coaching staff would brush it off with vague talk about team dynamics and development plans. But anyone paying attention knew better. This wasn't strategy, it was politics. On the court, you could see it in her eyes. The frustration of a player who knew she was being handcuffed. The quiet anger of realizing the same people who once celebrated her arrival were now second-guessing her every move. Off the court, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, with subtle whispers circulating about disagreements in film sessions and private meetings that didn't stay private for long. The Indiana Fever's golden era wasn't being built, it was being sabotaged from the inside. And the cracks only deepened when the media got involved. Headlines that once hailed Caitlin Clark as the savior of Indiana basketball suddenly shifted tone, questioning her leadership, her defense, even her attitude. Reporters started dropping subtle hints about chemistry issues, clearly fed from someone inside the organization. Social media amplified every clip where Caitlin showed even a flicker of frustration, twisting it into a narrative of arrogance or selfishness. Meanwhile, rival players smelled blood in the water. They targeted her physically in games, threw shade in post-game interviews, and the league officials seemed more than happy to look the other way. It was as if an unspoken campaign had been launched to humble her, to remind her that no one player, no matter how talented, was bigger than the league. But in trying to tear her down, they forgot one critical thing. Caitlin Clark was built for pressure, and every jab, every headline, every cheap shot was quietly fueling a fire they might not be ready to face. And then came the breaking point. A single game, one night, when all the simmering tension exploded into something the cameras couldn't ignore. Caitlin took the floor, not with the nervous energy of a player trying to survive, but with the cold focus of someone who had decided to fight back. Every possession became a statement, deep threes launched without hesitation, fearless drives into defenders who had been hacking her all season, assists fired with surgical precision. The crowd felt it, the bench felt it, even her doubters felt it. By the time the buzzer sounded, the scoreboard told only part of the story. The real message was in her glare, her posture, her refusal to break. This wasn't just a win, it was a declaration that she would not be pushed out, not be silenced, not be made small. And if the league wanted a fight, Caitlin Clark had just let them know she was ready to give them one. Behind the locker room doors, the real game wasn't being played on the court. It was being waged in whispers, glances, and carefully timed moves in the Fever's inner circle. Veteran voices who once embraced Caitlin as the savior were now treading lightly, calculating which side of the locker room they stood on. The front office, caught between appeasing their star rookie and keeping the veterans happy, began making subtle adjustments that spoke volumes. Practice drills were shifted. Play calling leaned toward sharing the load, which in reality meant less control in Caitlin's hands. Even the seating arrangements at media events seemed strategically altered to prevent her from owning the spotlight completely. The veterans, sensing a shift in power, weren't just playing the season, they were playing politics, testing how far they could push without outright mutiny. And in this chess match of egos, Caitlin wasn't the only queen on the board, but she was the one everyone was quietly maneuvering against. The tension didn't just stay in the Fever's orbit, it began spilling into the WNBA's broader landscape. Opposing teams, sensing the cracks, doubled down on their psychological warfare, trash-talking more aggressively, targeting Caitlin with hard fouls, and baiting her into moments that could make headlines for all the wrong reasons. The media, always hungry for a juicy subplot, pounced. Every sideline glare, every clipped post-game interview, every moment Caitlin looked even slightly frustrated was magnified and spun into a narrative of collapse. Rival players started giving cryptic comments in press conferences, hinting that things aren't as perfect in Indiana as they look. And while Caitlin tried to keep her focus on the game, the league's brightest spotlight, once a warm glow fueling her rise, was now an unforgiving floodlight, exposing every fracture and feeding a storm that no PR team could fully control. Inside the Fever locker room, the atmosphere had shifted from electric unity to quiet calculation. Players who once rallied behind Caitlin now seemed split, some still fiercely loyal, others quietly aligning with different voices in the room. Whispers of strategic changes, reduced roles, and even front office meddling began surfacing. Practices felt heavier, conversations shorter, and the playful energy that once defined this young squad had all but vanished. Coaches faced the impossible task of balancing egos, managing expectations, and still chasing wins in a league where momentum can vanish overnight. Meanwhile, Caitlin herself appeared caught in an emotional crossfire, determined to fight for her place as the team's heartbeat, yet increasingly aware that the very system built to elevate her might also be quietly working to edge her out. It wasn't just a battle for points on the scoreboard anymore. It was a battle for control, identity, and survival in a league that can turn its heroes into outsiders in the blink of an eye. And so, the Caitlin Clark saga, with the Indiana Fever, stands at a crossroads, a story that began as the dawn of a golden era now teeters on the edge of becoming a cautionary tale. What was once sold as a perfect marriage between a generational superstar and a franchise hungry for revival has unraveled into a tense standoff layered with politics, ego, and unspoken resentment. Fans watch in disbelief as the cracks grow deeper, each game feeling less like a celebration of talent and more like a silent referendum on whether this partnership can be saved. For Caitlin, the stakes couldn't be higher. Her legacy, her influence, and perhaps her future in Indiana all hang in the balance. For the Fever, the question is whether they have the vision and courage to build around the very player they once believed would carry them into greatness. But one truth remains unshakable in the WNBA. Loyalty is fragile, trust is currency, and even the brightest stars can fade if the fire within is left to burn alone. This is no longer just about basketball. This is about survival, pride, and the fight to define the next chapter before someone else writes it for you.